Next, what we'll want to do is we'll want to build out the document generation quote to be dropped in box at a later point. And what document generation does is it gives us a great amount of power to build packets based off different conditions. So let's take a look at how we will configure this document generation action. In the document generation action, you're actually given order of documents that you can place in. You can select or create a new template if required, and you're also able to set the based condition. So let's start with the first one, which is actually going to be a quotation pack front page template. So what I'll do is I will click on select or create a new template. Now what we'll need to do is locate the template file that we need. So you can use the tree view within the document library to go and navigate down and find that particular file. So we'll want to use the quotation pack front page template. I'll click on that, select OK. Now we're given the option to always include it or do based on a condition. Here we'll actually want to always include this quotation template. So we'll click OK, but we're not done yet. Now what we'll need to do is add additional templates. We also want to add in the advertising quote document. And in here, what we can do is select the additional template. Once again, we'll go and search through the document library and grab that value. That will always be included. Now, we actually want to add some documents depending on the location of that building, as the terms of services differ between the country of origin of that building. So let's go and select some new document templates, but we'll do based on condition for these. So in this option, we'll choose an order for 3, and this one can actually be for Australia. So what we can do is select the new template. We'll go through the same process of going through the tree view and finding the correct value, and select the terms of service for Australia document. Now what we can do is we can go on to the condition, and what we'll want to look at is the merge type, which can be done through a page break. And since we're choosing the based on condition, we'll say where the workflow data, building country, and we'll want it to equal the value Australia. We can add in additional conditions to further refine the condition of including this particular document within the bucket, but we don't need to now. I'll add a few more, but in the interest of time, we won't go through those steps. So we've gone ahead and added a few more terms of services for France, Germany, and the USA. What we need to do, though, is we need to actually create the output file name. So this is going to be the file name for the actual entire packet that we're using for our quote. Now, what we can do is we can hard code in a value, or we can actually use some of the metadata that we've collected in the process of creating this quote to create a dynamic output file name. So let's do that. What we'll want to do is we'll want to take some item property information, and we'll want to create this where it's the company that's making the request, the actual advertising pack value that they've selected. It's not the numeric value, but the name of the advertising pack. And what we'll do is we'll make sure that it's unique by adding the item ID afterwards. So we'll choose company, we'll add a space, and then we'll choose the advertising pack. And then what we can do is do an underscore and actually go to the value here for the item ID and choose item ID. Then we'll click OK. And what you'll notice now is that we actually have the output file name as company dash advertising pack underscore ID. Notice that the file extension is not required here. You'll see the output as a PDF file because we're choosing the generation type as single PDF file. Next, what we want to do, though, is we actually want to store this in a document library. Lucky for us, we already have a documents for signature library that we'll want to store the file in. So what we'll do is we'll go and navigate using the tree structure into our documents for signature library and choose that as the output location. What we'll also want to do is grab the output file URL. And notice that we don't actually have that URL generated. So once again, we'll go and create the variable required for this. This variable is going to be another single line of text variable, and we'll call it single file URL. Click Save, and we'll close the variable screen, and then choose single file URL as the value. What we also want to do though is make sure if there were any errors that makes us recreate the same document, that we're not going to run into an issue of having multiple named documents. We want to make sure that we overwrite the existing item to ensure that we have the latest version in the document library. So we'll check overwrite existing item. Notice that you have the ability to choose error handling. If we wanted to go into error handling, we can use something like state machines to create an additional error handling branch, capture the error, store the error occurrence in another variable, and the error text associated with the error for further reporting if required. However, we're not going to do that in this example. Next, we'll click Save. We've generated our document, but what we need to do now is we need to store it in a location that can be accessed by external users. And that area is actually going to be our box repository. We'll need to actually create a box URL that will be referenced within the box action. To do that, we're going to have to use a set variable action. So let's do that real fast. We'll grab the set variable action and we'll drop that right before the box action. Double click in and let's configure this. We need a box URL variable, which we don't have created, so we'll do that real fast and create that new variable. And the value needs to have the output ID that we've already created for our new document. So what we'll do is we'll create that variable one more time. If you remember, we'll go to the item properties and choose company, space, advertising, pack, underscore, and then we want the ID. However, unlike the document generation action, within this value, we will need to place the file extension. So just add .pdf and click OK. And you'll see here is our value. So we'll click Save. And now what we'll do is we'll hop into the box upload file action to upload that file into our environment. So we already have the file that we wish to upload, that packet of PDF files, into Box, and that's existing SharePoint content. Lucky for us, we were smart and saved that URL in a variable. So what we'll do is we'll click on the Browse button, we'll go over to the workflow variables, and we'll choose single file URL, which will quickly point us to the value we need. We already have the destination we need to go to in Box, but let's set the correct folder. We'll choose, and then what we want to do is use company. Now the company can be different. Luckily for us, we capture that company value. So we'll go back to item properties and we'll choose company and click OK. And so now we know the correct URL that we're going to and the correct destination folder that we're placing the document in. Now we need to actually grab that document name. And that document name was already set in a variable for us just previously. So we'll go to workflow variables and we'll grab box URL and save there. Now what we need to do is we need to provide an authorizing user. So what will happen here is, well, they need to authorize the identity that this file will be uploaded as. We'll send the authorizing user an email and get their authentication that we can upload that file. And that will happen after the workflow executes the initial time. One thing to keep in mind though is if any changes are made to the workflow and the workflow is republished, that authorizing user will have to reauthorize that connection to upload those files. Now what we can do though is select an output file URL if we want to collect that data, and in this instance we do. So what we'll want to do is we want to grab the uploaded URL and we'll store that in another variable. You guessed it right, we have to create that variable. So we'll go back to our variable screen and create a new one. And we'll click Save. Last but not least, we want to make sure that we can use a third-party technology, and we'll want to use Adobe Sign. Adobe Sign is an action for e-signature that resides in our Nintex Workflow Cloud product. To access that, we want to start a Nintex Cloud workflow, and that's why we're using the Start Workflow in Nintex Workflow Cloud action. So we've already built this workflow out in Nintex Workflow Cloud, and we've designated it with an external start URL. After that workflow has been designed, you want to take the start events or the start data for the start event and copy the start URL. After you've collected that value, select OK, and then we'll hop back to the designer. Double-clicking into the Start Workflow Nintex Workflow Cloud action, we'll go ahead and paste that external start URL. Click Connect, and here's where the magic happens. All of those start variables will come over, and you'll easily be able to sync up that data from your on-prem workflow right now to that Nintex Workflow Cloud workflow. In the interest of time, I'll sync these up, and then we'll come back. Now we've gone ahead and lined up all of the metadata or workflow variables with the correct start variables from our Nintex Workflow Cloud workflow, either through the variables we've created or collected throughout the process of the workflow, or the metadata information that was filled out initially by our end user in the request quote form. After we've gone and set up all these values, click Save, and your start workflow in Nintex Workflow Cloud workflow is configured. After that, we've got that change state end state machine action, which will allow us to exit the complex looping logic that we set up before. If we needed any additional actions after that state machine, once again, we can place them in this Perl. But for right now, we've met the requirements of our workflow. Once you're done, go ahead and publish that workflow, where you can give the workflow a name and click Submit.